everyone. I still see more people joining the webinar, so we'll give it another couple more minutes before we get started. Thank you. Right. Good morning, good afternoon to all of our participants here in Malaysia, across the region, as well as in the Netherlands. On behalf of the Netherlands Embassy in Malaysia, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar on developing a sustainable bio-based economy in Sarawak, opportunities and circular solutions from the Netherlands. My name is Ali Subramanian, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. To start us off, we have a few welcoming remarks by His Excellency Art Jacobi, Ambassador of the Netherlands in Malaysia.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all participants of the webinar on circular bio-based economy and Biohub port in Sarawak. This webinar is among the many events organized by the Netherlands Embassy at IGEM 2020. This year we are finding innovative ways to connect Dutch organizations with partners here in Malaysia and in the wider ASEAN region. I am delighted to announce that the Netherlands is concurrently holding a virtual trade mission to Southeast Asia from the 12th of October to the 11th of December. The delegates are from three main sectors: agri-food, water management and waste management. It is my pleasure to welcome all our delegates of the Dutch virtual mission who are joining us today from the Netherlands. The Port of Rotterdam Authority, in collaboration with Agentie Innovatie Malaysia, Regional Land and Pintulu Port Holdings, have started a close cooperation to study the development of the Biohub port and industrial area in Sarawak. The Port of Rotterdam concurrently accommodates the world's largest renewable industrial cluster. This ecosystem is realized through the constant development of new technologies and the forging of international partnerships. The Sarawak Biohub Port project is an excellent platform to encourage such partnerships and incorporate green technologies into the economy. In this webinar, a distinguished panel of speakers will provide an overview of bio-based developments in Malaysia. Furthermore, we will gain insights into new opportunities at the Sarawak Biohub port project and avenues for collaboration. I'm positive that this project will further enhance our existing cooperation in Malaysia towards developing a sustainable and circular economy. Before I conclude, I would like to invite everyone to explore innovative circular solutions from the Netherlands. Together, let us forge new partnerships in building a sustainable future. I kindly thank you for your attention.
Right. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. We're joined today by an esteemed panel of speakers from Agency Inovasi Malaysia, the Netherlands Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate, and the Port of Rotterdam, who will help us shed some light on the ecosystem of a bio-based economy and the potential in Sarawak. Throughout this session, I'd like to remind all of our participants today to disable your cameras and mute your microphones. You can ask your questions for the speakers through the Q&A or chat box. These questions will be answered in the Q&A session towards the end, so please do stay on if you can. We will also have a few polls throughout the webinar, and these will be on Menti. So do log on to menti.com, plug in the code, which will be displayed on the screen as the questions come up. And just to get us started, we have the first poll. Can we pull the first poll up, please? Right. So what is your perception on the opportunity and business environment in Malaysia as a bioeconomy investment destination? Use the code 721684 on Menti to answer the poll. The poll questions will be up for a few minutes while we get into our presentations. And now, on to our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Timothy Ong, Senior Vice President of Strategic Impact Projects and Industry Expert Collaboration at Agency Inovasi Malaysia. Timothy has led the development and implementation of many national policies, such as the National Biomass Strategy and the National Graphene Action Plan. He also leads the Biomass Strategy Unit for Malaysia and plays a key role in facilitating biomass projects in the country. Timothy, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ali. All right. First of all, thank you so much for arranging this platform. I think today it's a very different experience for every one of us to have it virtually, at least first time in terms of iGEM. But what I'll do today is just providing to you a overview of where some of the pockets of development would be in Malaysia when it comes to biomass-based industries, and more specifically, we will zoom down into the project in Sarawak to give you just a little bit of teaser before the next presenters take it deeper into the conversation. So with that, can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So as you know, Malaysia, it's we have a very strong agricultural-based setup, and if you looked at the biomass residues in Malaysia, you are seeing that predominantly scattered across 5 different major states. And if you looked at the top 5 states in Malaysia, they basically account for about 85% of the total biomass production. Of course, as we drill into detail, the breakdowns of these different sources of biomass might vary, but predominantly it is a residue from the existing agricultural sectors. Next slide, please. So if we just pick one of the, the major component of the biomass resource that we have, it will be the residues from the oil palm industry. And if you looked at the biomass production, obviously that's the biggest piece of the production of a byproduct from an existing agricultural industry. But you're talking about 94 million odd to 95 million tons in terms of solid matter, and around 70 million in terms of the liquid residues. The next screen, please. And if we start drilling into, naturally, the reason why we took up Sarawak and we start pinpointing on Sarawak was predominantly, if you looked at the opportunity that exists in terms of the biomass-based industry, it's basically scattered across 5 states. Like I mentioned, 85% of those resources are actually in the different 5 different states, and the East Malaysian states of Sabah and Sarawak account for more than 50% of those resources. And with that, the largest biomass producing state in Malaysia, just virtual by the size of the agriculture itself, is the state of Sarawak, followed by Sabah, and then you have Johor, Pahang, and Perak. So if you looked at the context for Sarawak, which you'll see in the slide itself, realize that we are not talking about a single feedstock option. We're looking at the biomass feedstock from the existing palm oil plantation residues, right? Of course, the timber and the rubber, and you have forestry residues itself. And in this calculation that we have, the 90 million odd tons that we put into play, it's really inclusive of other kinds of dedicated biomass plantations that would be possible considering the sustainability aspect of it and on marginal land not suitable for agriculture. So the details of that I'll be happy to share offline or in the Q&A sessions that you have later on. But if you looked at the overall spread, right, in Sarawak, you are looking at around 70 odd palm oil mills. And then those are the predominant source of the residues itself. So you're talking about very uniform biomass matter in this context. And if you looked at the project in Sarawak, it's spread across 3 to 4 major clusters. And if we do a comparison just by virtue of size, you're looking at Sarawak itself being approximately 3 times the size of the Netherlands. So that should give you some gauge in terms of the potential. And it resides in around the island of Borneo. So the countries that surrounds it, basically you have Brunei as a neighbor, you have Sabah, the other state in Malaysia, and of course the Kalimantan, which is part of Borneo Island. So you're looking really at when you look at the feedstock possibility, you're really looking at the Borneo Island as one as opposed to looking at them in isolation. So can we move to the next slide, please? And if you start to look into, well, of course, we have been developing many projects with different parties over the years. And I think slightly different this time around when we start to look at the direction of the Biohub development. It's really around an ecosystem, right? So you're not really looking at a very specific project in silo. You're looking at an integration and a platform that allows multiple bio-based industries to coexist, right? And one very important point that I would love to stress is the project itself, instead of taking away from biodiversity, it is supposed to grow the biodiversity in the locations of which they operate, right? So there will be sustainability aspect of this project sorted out both from an economic perspective, social perspective, as well as environmental perspective. So bear in mind whatever I say here is not purely coming from a bio-industrial standpoint, but it also comes from the angle of sustainability. And just as a backdrop, Sarawak itself has pledged to reduce 45% of its emission by 2030. So it's still consistent with what was agreed during the Paris Agreement. And just some highlights over the past couple of days, the Chief Minister of the state of Sarawak have actually started pointing out in the possible legislation around enabling a carbon trading platform in the future. So I think these are signs and indication. Of course, we are working a few pieces of legislation as well to support that together with the Sarawak state government. But you are looking at now a creation of an ecosystem in a conducive environment to allow participation, whether it's from the foreign companies or local companies. And I think the key that we want to stress in this whole development is around partnerships and collaboration. So it's not really around a single champion of this project. And can we move to the next slide, please? So if you look at the way the project is designed, you actually have decentralized facilities. And in that sense, the decentralized facilities itself will actually be means to bring down your typical problem, which is the cost of logistics for the mobilization of biomass. And in that, it basically centralizes to a location of which a lot of these biomanufacturing industries actually exist. And this is directly linked to a bioport facility. So you're talking about an end-to-end infrastructure as well as a downstream portfolio coming all the way from upstream mobilization to midstream processing to downstream processing, and eventually the end product that goes out as well. So you are really talking about a complete ecosystem, and I must stress that in the absence of those components, the business case itself may be challenging. So it is important that we have the entire ecosystem in play. Next. Right, so this is just a snapshot. I'm pinged by the organizers that I think barely 2 minutes or a minute left in the presentation. But what we'll do is we'll show you a video, a 3-minute video that gives you an idea of this project. But bear in mind, the thing that I want to stress is the biomass industry itself and the feedstock itself must be sustainable in order for these projects to work. And in that, I think Adeline or Ellie, I think we can play the video.
The journey begins in Sarawak, the land of the Hornbill. Sarawak will be home to a fully circular and symbiotic biohub port development. With over 19 million dry tons and over 2 million hectares of plantation, the source for sustainable biomass is exceptional across the state. The biomass strategy for Sarawak focuses on biomass from the agriculture sector, forestry, algae, and even dedicated crops on marginal land. Concentrated in 3 main areas throughout Sarawak, biomass would be mobilized cost-effectively through the setup of high-tech satellite centers that function as aggregation, pre-treatment, and processing facilities. Output from these facilities will be feedstock to the Biohub port, where the biomanufacturing of intermediate chemicals and bioproducts will take place. Biomass through biorefineries can be converted to biosugars that in turn can be used to produce bioplastics and high-value chemicals. The excess electricity from existing and future renewable energy sources in Sarawak can be transformed into chemistry based on the power-to-gas principle. We can also produce hydrogen and oxygen gas through electrolysis. Hydrogen can be used as raw feedstock in the chemical industry and also in mobility. Oxygen can be used in the chemical industry and in a vital process called gasification. Other biomass feedstock can be further processed into biocoal. Biocoal can be fed into the gasification process with other inputs to acquire a rich biogas called syngas. Syngas is the route to produce acetic acid and methanol, which are intermediate chemicals that can be feedstock for most other chemicals. This enables the manufacturing of many products that can be cost-competitive fossil-based replacements. Syngas can also be converted into bio-LNG to fuel trucks, barges, ferries, and even freight vessels. The products from biomass are endless, and this is only the beginning. This project supports the trade between 2 nations, Netherlands and Malaysia, a project that highlights digital and green technology real-time data. We save time, money, and emissions by making the most of new technologies, but only together can we become a sustainable industry. Only together can we help to improve the rural community. We will create a circular industry. This is our journey to change the perspective and be part of a global movement. The future is now. Make it happen.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation and video, Timothy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for allowing. Am I on time as far as the presentation is concerned?
We'll make it work.
Okay.
So it's actually really interesting to see the scale of biomass potential in Malaysia and particularly in Sarawak. And apart from the availability of biomass from the plantations, what sets Sarawak apart from other potential locations for this project? Perhaps I could call upon you to comment on that during the Q&A session later.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I have a few things to say about that as well. Yes.
Okay, great. So now we've got the results from our first poll question up. So perhaps we can pull that up onto the screen. All right, here we go. So I guess a lot of you think that it's a good opportunity and a supportive business environment for Malaysia as a bioeconomy investment destination. My gosh, that's a mouthful. So that's good to know. 55% of you think that, and only 36% think it's a fair opportunity, but easy to do business. I guess it's a good sign that only 9% think it's unattractive opportunity and a complex business environment. Well, I guess before we move on to our next speaker, we do have another poll question on Menti. This one is pretty straightforward and shouldn't take too long. And essentially what we'd like to find out is maybe what your background is, whether you're from research, industry, government, or other. So again, go to menti.com and use the code 5952132 to get your answers in. So now on to our next speaker, Mr. Case Quant, a senior expert on bioenergy and circular bio-based economy at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, where he links researchers and industry to help develop circular bio-based economy and bioenergy in the Netherlands and abroad. I'd like to just quickly remind all of our participants that if they have questions for Timothy or for Case, do put it into the Q&A box or the chat box. All right, Case, over to you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. My presentation is about the circular bio-based economy, how we can valorize residues, how that can happen in Malaysia, and also how we do that now in the Netherlands. I am trying to go to the next slide. Yes. So the circular bio-based economy is part of the sustainable development. We are all looking at this moment at a pandemic situation, but we're also looking globally at a development that really has to go different than we do it nowadays. And a lot of different goals have been developed. Yes, I am trying to control my screen. But I ask NDBC to do it. Yes, so we have a lot of different goals under the, let's say, circular, under the sustainable development. And actually for the Netherlands, climate change is very important. And the bioeconomy can play an important role in realizing these goals. It's about co-creation of a circular bioeconomy. It's something we are doing here in the Netherlands, and also something we can do jointly in Malaysia. It's about food security, it's about a sustainable planet, but it's also about creating jobs and economic growth, and to do that in a circular society. So next slide. Within this circular economy, we have to use the biomass resources properly. That's why we work with biorefineries, where the renewable resources will go in, are used for different applications, for food, feed, but also for chemicals and for materials. And what is left over, we use that for energy. Next slide. So residues are a crucial resources, and we work with residues in the Netherlands, but we also think, as it was just shown by Timothy Ong, there are a lot of palm residues available in Malaysia, and specifically also in Sarawak. So we have asked Wageningen University to do a study how that could work. Next slide. And basically what we see is that from palm plantations, a lot of leftovers are available. So it's the palm, the water, but it's also the empty fruit bunches, palm kernel shells, and mesocarp fiber. And a lot of different options have been calculated. And we have seen that, let's say, actually by washing the empty fruit bunches and using the material for, let's say, chemicals, but also to use the palm kernel shells and the mesocarp fibers for products, it's the most optimal solution. So the different options have been compared, as you can see in the next graph, on the next slide, where basically all these options are compared. And overall, when you take all the options into account, a greenhouse gas reduction of about 50%, next slide, can be achieved. So that's really an improvement in carbon. The carbon footprint will become smaller, and that's a major improvement that we can achieve with these pulp mills. So valorization of residues is something we have to do all over the world. It's also something we do in the Netherlands. Next slide. This is, for example, how we produce renewable energy, and then specifically bioenergy in the Netherlands. Residues have been used. It's waste where we produce energy. It's biogas coming from manure and organic wastes. It's also heating with residues, co-firing of biomass, and of course the biofuel production. So over the years, we have, let's say, it has become about 5 times more than what we have achieved than we did 20 years ago. So it's a major achievement that can be done. And in the Netherlands, we have a lot of industries. Next slide. That are, let's say, able to produce this. So it's companies that can produce combustion equipment, anaerobic digestion equipment, but also it's for upgrading of biogas to natural gas quality. It's also about pyrolysis. So a lot of different technologies are available. And we have developed a technology guide that is available from the booth, from the embassy, at the iGEM conference, so you can go there and download this tech guide that is available. It's a very recent one, so it gives you all the recent information about the different, let's say, companies that we have in the Netherlands. But we want to do more. Yes, next slide, please. We also want to look at, let's say, biorefineries. And this is an example of a typical Dutch crop that's called the sugar beet. And the company Kosan develops, let's say, different products coming out of the sugar beet. So it goes from, of course, the normal sugar, but from there also by utilizing the residues from the sugar beet, and also by using let's say, the sugars to produce chemicals. They have a range of products coming out of one product from the agricultural area. And we think that this is also something that can be done, let's say, also in the future within Sarawak. So this is an interesting way to go forward. Next slide, please. Another way to look at this, it's through this is just an example. There are many projects. This is the company Avantium in the northern part of the Netherlands. Next slide, where they actually convert woody biomass into sugars. Next slide. And they have developed a process to realize this. And so this is available and could also be used to convert empty fruit bunches into sugars. So there are a lot of options available from the Dutch side to work with Malaysia. Next slide, please. So it's, as it was mentioned before, this is something we can do together. Yes, it's about collaboration. And next slide. So we think that it can increase sustainability when we work together. We can make value out of the residues. So we need good policies to make that happen. And in Sarawak, this seems to be possible. We can develop jointly projects for green power, green materials. And of course, we also have to look into financing these bio-based projects. Next slide. So we also, Malaysia could also join international collaboration. I myself, I'm let's say, involved in this technology collaboration program, and it's something that could be discussed. So next slide. So to conclude, I think it's important to notice that these residues can create a value. They have an environmental value, but also an economic values. With biorefineries, we can realize this. And I think Sarawak offers a very good opportunity to make this happen in the Sustainable Growth Initiative that's now ongoing there, as it was just mentioned. Okay, the next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, my email address is here. And you can, of course, also go to the booth of the Netherlands Embassy at the iGEM exhibition to get more information there. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Kees. It's definitely enlightening to see the role that biorefineries play in the setup of a circular economy. We do have a question for you from one of our participants. Do you see that Malaysia will be a net exporter of hydrogen, of a user of our homegrown or home-produced technology? Well, hang on, of our homegrown technology. So maybe that's something that we can answer later on in the Q&A session.
And I would also like to ask also Timothy to answer this question. Yes. So
yes.
Yes, yeah, I'm ready to answer that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. I'd like to remind our participants to continue submitting your questions in the chat box as well as in the Q&A box so that we can answer it later on. And before we get to our final speaker, we've got the results of our second poll to bring up. All right. And it's very clear to see, oh, wow, we've got an even split between industry and government at 31% of our participants being from industry and government, 23% from others, and 15% from research. So I think it's very helpful to know of who's interested in the topics that we're addressing in today's webinar. I'd like to move on to our next poll question, which would be, how could collaboration with the Netherlands support the circular bio-based economy? So could we pull that up onto the screen, please? Great. So as I mentioned before, do log into menti.com, and the code for this question is 5864124. All right. Now, moving on to our final speaker for today, we have Mr. Andre Todt, Director of PT Pelabuhan Rotterdam, Indonesia. Andre has had a long career, starting with sailing, stopping along the way to become CEO of Maersk Central Europe, COO of the Port of Rotterdam, and CEO of Sohar Industrial Port Company in Oman. Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Good morning, good afternoon, dear guests. It's a pleasure for me to present to you the Port of the Future and to explain Port's active role in two major challenges of energy transition and the digitization process, and trying to link that also to the project in Sarawak. But before we start, there is a small video. Let's play the video. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. Yes. Always staggering those numbers, and especially if you look at what a port can be a job generator. If you see that in Port of Rotterdam, 385 jobs are relying on the port. The world is changing fast for ports and shipping and for everybody, and we'll get another change, a push of change through the COVID-19 developments. For Port of Rotterdam, it is a major challenge, and that is the reason that Port of Rotterdam wants to be a front runner in the energy transition and digitization process. Next. As you can see from this slide, Port of Rotterdam still heavily relies on fossil energies. If you look at a staggering 20% of the total Dutch CO2 emissions are triggered through the Port of Rotterdam. And that is the main reason Port of Rotterdam wants to have this proactive role in the energy transition and become a front runner in the transition itself. Next. And this gives you a perspective of the CO2 global emissions, which 23% are related to transport, of which 30% is then related to goods, and 2.5% are related to shipping. Next. And the Port of Rotterdam is working already in big ways in developing the renewable energy sector. And it already has the largest bio-based cluster in the world. And there we can also see then the connection to Sarawak. And besides the renewable energy on the biomass and bio-based industry, Port of Rotterdam is also working on a major hydrogen infra project and carbon capture and storage projects. Next. Port of Rotterdam has created a three-step approach for this transition. First, to create new infra and efficiency. Secondly, new energy systems. And three, create the circular economy. The main message from this slide is that you have to do it in partnerships between the Port Authority, the private enterprises, the private business, and the governments to make this transition a success. And what is also very important, that you bring your current industries with you, because they do represent a value, they do have a lot of jobs, and you have to bring your existing industries into the transition. And that could be a big advantage if we look at the Sarawak project, because there we could start from the beginning on creating the new energy systems and the circular economy. Next. These are also a little bit, a few numbers in relation to digitization process. They're quite staggering as well. If you look at 30% of the shipments worldwide are delayed. For one container, for one shipment, you need 28 transaction parties. And what I find most staggering is that 25%, a quarter of all the trucks on the roads are carrying air. So they are empty. And there's a lot to gain in the logistic chain. Next. And that's the reason that besides the energy transition, Rotterdam is working and wants to be a front runner in the digitization process as well. But here again, it's the story of cooperation. It's the story of making sure that all the players in the port do share their data to create a smart port. That's the main message if you want to go into digitization process and improve your logistic chain in the port or even outside the port. It's the cooperation between all the players in the port. Next. And then we come to the Sarawak project. We are very proud and thrilled that we have this MOU signed between Regal, AIM, and Bintulu Port Holding. And we already see that in the process where we are today, that we learn already a lot from each other. Our first activity will be to see if we can create a good commercial analysis on how we can face and shape this Biohub port, and at the same time also create the Biohub industrial estate. And one of the biggest advantages for the Sarawak project is the proximity to feedstock. That's a bit different if you compare it to Rotterdam. But in Sarawak, and Timothy Ong already explained that, proximity to feedstock is very close, which gives us the opportunity to start from scratch immediately into the circular economy. Thank you. Next. And thank you very much for attending this short presentation on Port of the Future and linking it to the Sarawak Biohub developments. Terima kasih.
Right. Well, thank you for that presentation, Andre. During the Q&A later, I'm sure we'll have a few more questions for you, but maybe one to kind of think about, to comment on, would be, what do you think the role the Biohub will play with the Port of Rotterdam's energy transition ambitions? We do have the results of our third poll question coming up. So let's bring that up on screen. A very interesting result. We've got 67% who think that joint business development would be the key way that the Netherlands could support, with 33% saying knowledge transfer. I'd like to encourage you all to keep going and voting on menti.com when we bring up our final poll question, as well as to keep putting in your questions for our panelists in both the chat box or the Q&A, depending on which platform you're logging in from. So let's bring up the final poll question for today, which is quite straightforward. Would you be interested in the opportunity of online matchmaking? So to answer this poll, please use the code 5156391. While we've got this, while you're answering this question for this poll, I would like to make a quick announcement on the Dutch virtual trade mission for Southeast Asia. From the 12th of October until the 12th of December this year, the Netherlands is organizing a virtual trade mission to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, the ASEAN 5. The delegation consists of Dutch companies in 3 main sectors: agri-food, water management and technology, waste management, and circular design. So despite the current challenges and travel restrictions, participants from Malaysia and ASEAN still have the opportunity to connect to Dutch companies. You're invited to set up a profile on the B2Match platform. The link is up on the screen, and we should be putting it in the chat box as well, to participate in the different sessions and engage on one-on-one video conversations with potential business partners. Right, so now if you have voted in the poll to sign up for the business matching, here's what we will see and exactly how to do so. Right, there we go. So for the 78% of you who said yes, now you know how to move forward. All right, so now we'll get to our question and answer session. We do have a few questions from our participants. So please do keep putting that in the chat box and the Q&A box, but we can go ahead and get started with some of the questions that were already brought up. So Timothy, perhaps you'd like to start with the question for you on what sets Sarawak apart from other potential locations for this project?
Well, I would say, what sets Malaysia apart, right? Because while we're talking about this specific project in Sarawak, do bear in mind that from a national standpoint, it does make a lot of sense, to develop a project, of course, in Sarawak, Sabah, as well as in Peninsular Malaysia. It really depends on where your business interest is and what sort of scale that you're looking for, right? But if we drive specifically to the case in Sarawak, I think Andre did mention a couple of things, which is the proximity to the feedstock. That's one of the major components. The enabling environment, as well as the possibility of co-sharing of a lot of infrastructure. So with that, I think this is something which is announced 2 days ago. The groundbreaking has just taken place. There will be hydrogen fueling stations in Sarawak. In fact, there are 6 of those planned already, and that's spearheaded by our partners, of this project as well as the state petroleum company, right? So you are looking at that being one of those kinds of facilities that we talked about. So hydrogen, both green and blue, I think that's always in the Port of Rotterdam's video, right? They talked about both of that. And that's both possible in Sarawak, and you can see the I would say the interest from the state government to move to that energy transition, right? Because you're talking about natural gas as a feedstock. I think that's the cleanest form of fossil-based energy source today. And with that, an integration to the Biohub port project that we talked about, we're already in active discussions and planning with the state government of Sarawak to do that transition together. And we are getting support from the highest leadership in the state of Sarawak as well. So, well, we are seeing that, it's always around, of course, the enabling environment is very important. And in that, I mean both from a political, economic, as well as the implementation as well. And I think for the specific case in Sarawak, I think we have most of those components in play, right? And I would love to say that answering to one of your poll questions, right, which is, what would be the interest for a lot of people? I would defer to use the word knowledge transfer from the Netherlands. I would say knowledge exchange. That would be the more right word, because there's a lot of offerings in Malaysia as well that Dutch companies or technologies can benefit from, and operating using Malaysia as a gateway to ASEAN. That's also one of the angles that companies should be looking at. Yes, and I would want to answer one of those questions that's given in the chat group as well, with regards to enzyme technology, as well as the selling of energy or renewable energy back to Sarawak Energy Berhad. I think those are the questions that I would be able to pick up. And because the core principle of this project in Sarawak revolves around an end-to-end renewable solution, right? So we are talking even the source of energy that powers these industries are also coming from renewable resources. So the only party that could provide that to us in Sarawak is Sarawak Energy Berhad, right? So I think obviously there is an opportunity to discuss that, and we have also been asked by the state government to work with Sarawak Energy Berhad to look into how we can work out a mechanism around it. So to that question for SSM Associates, yes, that's definitely possible. And I'm personally aware there are a couple of negotiations ongoing with regards to power purchase agreement from the renewable side or biomass power plant. And of course, the enzyme technology collaboration, right? So I think one thing that we have to get very clear in this project is that we view infrastructure as everything from the resource itself towards a feedstock. So in feedstock means the different inputs that's required for the downstream company, right? So a lot of these downstream companies do not need to worry about the messy portion of handling biomass sustainably, right? So I think that's one of the key points. But the enzyme technology portion, definitely there's a room that we could explore. Talking to us obviously would help, because we are agnostic when it comes to the technology type. So we're not picking winners of the which ones will be the front runners. But obviously enzyme technology is more prominent in this kind of environment today, right? So I think you see more of those in the global bioeconomy scene, right? So these are just a few things that I'd like to stress as well.
All right, thanks for that very comprehensive answer, Timothy, and addressing a lot of the questions that have been brought up so far. Perhaps we can maybe get to Case a little bit to talk a little bit about these technologies, since we've got some questions about hydrogen and ammonia technologies and what Malaysia can do in that, and maybe potential collaboration, as well as the enzyme technology question that Timothy just answered. So, and then maybe we can then circle back to Andre to talk a little bit more about the enablers that you mentioned earlier on. Case?
Yes, thank you very much. In the Netherlands, we have quite an extensive research going on, let's say, converting biomass in all kinds of products. So there is a lot of know-how available from different universities. And there is also let's say, companies are working on the production of enzymes. So I can mention several companies that are available there, so they could be interested. I think there is a lot of know-how, but for the companies from the Netherlands, it will be quite crucial that they have a partner in Malaysia that they can work with. It will not be, let's say, just going on their own. So they're really looking for partnerships in order to build up the business. I think what's also an important point is that we have a lot of know-how also at our universities, and I think universities are also interested to collaborate and are also already collaborating. So, for example, I can mention Wageningen University that is already working a lot in Malaysia, especially in the agricultural area, to, let's say, improve the sustainability of production and also bringing this knowledge on new plants, new crops, and so on into Malaysia. So that's what I see, let's say, as important areas to work together. When it comes to hydrogen, we have a very, let's say, there is a lot of work going on at this moment in the Netherlands, and we also see hydrogen as an energy carrier. But of course, you also need windmills or solar systems to produce the electrons, so that through electrolysis you can produce the hydrogen. Then, of course, hydrogen can then be used in the production of ammonia, and which, of course, is better storable than hydrogen. So we are kind of developing this, but it's not yet, let's say, a very cheap solution. We see it as really a solution for the future and something that needs to be developed further. But it's really by linking solar, wind, and hydrogen, to link that together as a, let's say, a renewable resource, a storable resource. And I think the carbon atoms that are in the bio-based economy are also a way of storing solar energy that can be used to produce products, chemicals, and with the leftovers you can also produce energy. And that actually is at this moment probably a cheaper solution in many cases than going through windmills and hydrogen.
All right, well, thank you very much for that answer, Kees. So now to Andre, just to kind of circle back to a few points that both Timothy made, as well as what you made in your presentation regarding the enablers and the Port of Rotterdam's obviously interest and commitment to this project in Sarawak. Perhaps you could give us your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, so the biggest enabler for Sarawak is what we said before, is the proximity to feedstock. That's a very important item. And already a lot of experience with Sarawak has in the biomass development. And at the same time, Rotterdam being already the largest biomass developer in the world. So to make that link, that is a perfect match. I see one question on the timelines. Yeah, that depends a little bit also on how COVID will further develop. At the moment, we do what we call a virtual opportunity analysis that will bring us to January. And after that, we would start what we call a feasibility study, the social economic study, environmental study.
So I'm going to send this picture to her and say, it's almost done.
I'm sorry.
I think somebody should be on mute.
Yes.
And that normally takes you up to close to a year with all the studies you have to perform. But at the same time, and maybe Timothy can elaborate a little bit on that, in Sarawak, they're already working on what we call pre-treatment plants, pre-treatment facilities. And that could start earlier or simultaneously towards the end goal of creating the bioport and the bio-industrial estate.
Yeah, I guess that question is directed to me, right? Yes, obviously, we see this as a long-term opportunity, but of course there are certain components of the project that will start, I think based on the public domain information some of those items may kick off in Q1 next year, depending on the situation, obviously, and the limited mobility. But a lot of those components could actually be sorted out at the local level, right? So I think that's the comfort of that. But if you looked at a typical projection on even, a realistic timeline for setting up a refinery, right, or refinery of sorts, you are looking at a typical 3 to 4 year time frame before you could actually see you can actually see a completion of the first plant in terms of anywhere near the port and things like that, right? I mean, these are just engineering limitations that you have, right? Even if you start building today, you get that situation. But a lot of the other pre-treatment facilities is something that we are looking at accelerating, and these facilities will be spread out throughout Sarawak because logistics cost is a major component in this whole equation, right? And in that pre-treatment facilities itself, it will have, we do actually want to open up this platform to let technology players speak to us, or some of the prospective solution parties to come to us, because we already are evaluating a couple of them at the moment. And I think we can obviously test out different technologies in different clusters of those opportunities. So with that, I think at the end of the day, what makes it interesting for us is we're looking at the entire Sarawak as far as the feedstock base is concerned, and we are looking at an average pricing as far as the cost of mobilization. So I think that's the advantage as opposed to a silo project, right? Because you are limited by the purely by the location itself. And of course, the other component of it, which is the port and the industrial complexes and stuff like that, that's something that we can take on a much longer conversation going forward.
Right. Thanks for that, Tim. We do have another question from one of our participants, and I'm going to direct this to Tim, which is it correct that Sarawak currently has a power surplus?
Well, Sarawak has always been speaking to neighbors for power purchase, and I think because largely some of the renewable resource, depending on location, right? Because certain locations in Sarawak you have surplus, some you don't, right? So it really depends on the location that we talked about. But in general, I don't think we have a shortage of energy, right? I think that's more appropriate the word. No shortage of energy. I think as far as self-sufficiency is concerned, I think Sarawak is there. Unless you have somebody that requires 1,000 megawatts today, I guess I think it's still possible, right? And I don't think that will be a major limitation for the state of Sarawak, at least not today.
All right. Well, I think it looks like we've got most of the questions that have been put forward answered. So maybe if I could ask each of you to maybe put in your thoughts on if there was one key element that needs to be strengthened in order to get these collaborations up and running, what would that be?
Ending COVID-19.
Would I be starting this as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how about we start with Case then?
Yes.
Case, you might need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I think we have seen here a lot of interesting opportunities. The resources are there. I think what we are looking at is really now, let's say, an interest also from the side of Sarawak to develop this. So it's we know that there is now a governmental policy to move ahead. But we're also looking for, of course, for the local industries that are there to see how we can collaborate with local industries. Then that will then enable, let's say, opportunities also for the Dutch companies. So I think continue the collaboration, but we are looking for clear signs that this sustainable development will get stronger and will take place, and that will create a lot of joint opportunities and make the whole world more sustainable. Thank you.
All right, then maybe Andre, your thoughts?
No, I have nothing further to add.
Okay, I guess Case quite covered that point. Timothy.
Well, just one word, right? I think consistency, right? I mean, this is something that you have to commit yourself to. It's not going to be easy. I can upfront tell you that it's not going to be easy to do this transition. It's not going to be easy globally. It's not going to be easy in Malaysia. It's not going to be easy in Sarawak, but we will have to do it nevertheless, right? And I think it brings me right towards closing this. It's really around solving global challenges together. That's the tagline that you have, right? That's something I don't have displayed on my virtual background. But I think that's the thing, right? No single country can solve this alone. I think that's the key point that I'm trying to make. Thank you.
I think that's very well said, Timothy. We're all in this together, and we obviously, if we need to be working together and collaborating together in order to solve these problems. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our Q&A session. I'd like to thank our three speakers today, Timothy, Case, and Andre, for their time and very insightful presentations. If you'd like to find out more about the projects and about how to collaborate, you can get in touch with the Netherlands Embassy. And I think they'll be putting up the contact details up on the screen now, but you can also contact both Case, Timothy, and Andre directly. I do believe we'll be sharing the slides with all of our participants. So do be on the lookout for that. All right, well, thank you all very much for your time. I do want to remind participants that the embassy has a booth at the virtual exhibition, so do visit them there. And the information that Case had mentioned earlier will be available at the booth too. For those of you who have a little bit of extra time, we will be playing a few videos at the end of this session for you to enjoy. And with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. Thank you to our speakers. And I wish you all a very good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us, Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Imagine a climate-neutral port. Energy from wind farms, carbon-neutral sailing, sustainable industry, a circular economy. A digital port with real-time data. A port where operations can be predicted. A port without waiting times. A port that saves time, money, and emissions by making the most of new technology. We're not there yet, but our mission is clear. The smartest port in the world and climate neutral in 2050. Only together we can become a sustainable port. Only together we can use digital technology to make our logistics smart. Only together we can remain a leader with major economic value, so we can remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. We won't sit back and wait. That's not in our DNA. We establish the foundations, the infrastructure, the services. We drive and forge coalitions. We achieve sustainability step by step. We use residual heat and store CO2, electrification and hydrogen, green and blue. We will create a circular industry. Our innovative capacity and strong business climate keep us working. We create great opportunities for smart hands and bright minds. Enough jobs for people and the treasures they hope to find. Port of Rotterdam, the future is now. Make it happen.
create a better life for our generation and generations to come. Carbon emissions reduction through sustainable consumption, reuse of carbon, and a circular economy is the key to achieving that. But time is running out. We have very little time to put an end to climate change. It is time that we act much faster and much bolder. Through new sustainable circular economic models, technology and innovations, both digital and green, we stand a chance. As we build solutions for transport, aviation, chemicals and bioproducts, companies around the world are racing to deliver the promise. It is no different in Asia, but in particular, one ASEAN country sees these developments from a different perspective: Malaysia. Over the years, the Malaysian government has continuously demonstrated our dedication and passion for circular economy and green innovations, and we will never stop until we achieve our vision. Now, the journey begins in Sarawak, the land of the Hornbill. Sarawak will be home to a fully circular and symbiotic biohub port development. With over 19 million dry tons and over 2 million hectares of plantation, the source for sustainable biomass is exceptional across the state. The biomass strategy for Sarawak focuses on biomass and residues from the agriculture sector, forestry, algae, and even dedicated crops on marginal land. Concentrated in 3 main areas throughout Sarawak, biomass would be mobilized cost-effectively through the setup of high-tech satellite centers that function as aggregation, pre-treatment, and processing facilities. Output from these facilities will be feedstock to the Biohub port. The accompanying ecosystem will spur developments in communities where the biomanufacturing of intermediate chemicals and bioproducts will take place. Imagine a Biohub port that consists of an integrated bioindustrial complex and dedicated bioport with the best-in-class infrastructure and supporting ecosystem. Deployment of state-of-the-art digital technologies, cutting-edge biotechnologies anchored on sustainable renewable energy platforms. Biomass through biorefineries can be converted to biosugars that in turn can be used to produce bioplastics and high-value chemicals. The excess electricity from existing and future renewable energy sources in Sarawak can be transformed into chemistry based on the power-to-gas principle. We can also produce hydrogen and oxygen gas through electrolysis. Hydrogen can be used as raw feedstock in the chemical industry and also in mobility. Oxygen can be used in the chemical industry and in a vital process called gasification. Other biomass feedstock can be further processed into biocoal. Biocoal can be fed into the gasification process with other inputs to acquire a rich biogas called syngas. Syngas is the route to produce acetic acid and methanol, which are intermediate chemicals that can be feedstock for most other chemicals. This enables the manufacturing of many products that can be cost-competitive fossil-based replacements. Syngas can also be converted into bio-LNG to fuel trucks, barges, ferries, and even freight vessels. The products from biomass are endless, and this is only the beginning. This project supports the trade between 2 nations, Netherlands and Malaysia, a project that highlights digital and green technology real-time data, where operations are fully predictable, value chain fully sustainable, so smart that there's no waiting time. We save time, money, and emissions by making the most of new technologies, but only together can we become a sustainable industry. We must forge coalitions and partnerships. Only together can we help to improve the rural community and change the quality of life of local farmers. We expect to bring them with us on this journey. Smart agriculture, community programs, and inclusive developments. Only together can we bring fair exponential growth to the economy. No one is left behind. We will create a circular industry with great opportunities for smart hands and bright minds, enough jobs for people, and equal opportunity. We believe that success is defined by us. This is our journey to change the perspective and be part of a global movement. The future is now. Make it happen.